You know me. This is like, here, I don't want, I don't want to be on.
Good evening. I'll call the meeting to order, please. Would you all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Tonight we have 15 people zooming in and attending the meeting, so welcome to the meeting. And on a sad note, John Bulgar's wife, John is a member of the board, his wife passed this morning, and we certainly do send John and the family our condolences and keep them all, the family and John, in your thoughts and prayers. At this time, I'll ask for a motion to approve the agenda, and because we're so spread out.
So moved.
Thank you, Jason and Isetta. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion is passed. The other one that way. Okay. We will begin tonight with the reentry plan that Michael is going to present to us.
So good evening and thank you. Tonight we're going to provide you with a brief overview, give you an update on two things that are vital to the teaching and learning process here at North Rose-Wolcott. One being the overview of our potential reopening plan, and then Mrs. Pagliatti is going to give a highlight to this year's professional development plan. So, you know, if you think about everything that we've endured since March 16th of last spring till now, you'll understand that these are different times in education. Last Thursday, the state released a 145-page guiding document with several items that we need to consider in our plan. So currently, the number one question in our community is, will our children go back to school this fall? I can't tell you the number of times I've heard it, but I can say with certainty the answer is yes. The fact that they're going to go back to school is a guarantee. Where they go back and how they go back is the uncertainty. So currently we have three options, and we label them bricks and mortar, which is, you know, business as usual, school on campus. Virtual, which is very much what we did last spring semester, and a hybrid, which is a combination of those two programs. Each of these programs have options. Each of these programs have drawbacks. As you know, with the bricks and mortar approach, we have limitations based on how many students can be in a classroom, how we process down the hall, and what our special area teachers are able to do in order to limit the contact for the potential of COVID-19 outbreak or spread. So that one certainly seems like it's the one that people want the most, but at this point in time, given the nature of the restrictions that we're faced with, it seems the least likely to occur. The virtual would be very similar to what we offered last spring, and keep in mind that our district did very well, all things considered, but that's tough to truly understand what our students' needs are from a social and emotional standpoint when everything is online. The hybrid model, which would be a combination of both, is probably where our team has spent a lot of our energy recently. For purposes of today, I just want to give you a little bit of an overview as to what the plan looks like in terms of options, all the different components that we have to account for when we upload our plan, And to let you know from a process standpoint, this work began several weeks ago. We're probably in our 8th or 9th week of planning, so waiting for last week's guidance document would have probably put us behind schedule and behind the 8 ball. So I want to give compliments to Mr. Scott Bishoping, Mr. Bob Megan, Mrs. Megan Pagliatti for the work that we've done from probably the first week of May until now. And I'd also like to compliment the administrative team, directors, building administrators and such that really got together to break our plan apart last week. And then today we brought our larger group together, which was comprised of teacher, community members, directors, and parents. So that's been quite the task. But if you go to the next screen, you'll see the number of components that we have to factor into our plan. There's about 15 areas that are identified by the state that we need to factor in. And again, you know, we've had a bunch of meetings, commitment from stakeholders, and really a lot of hard work and time has gone into what we have established as a working draft. Today's work, which was about 2 hours in length, really dissected each of these different components to give us feedback and perspective from the community outlook, from the teaching outlook, and from a parent perspective as to what we need to incorporate. So, you know, as you see, and I'm not going to read them to you, it's quite comprehensive. And I would say to you, our team has probably added a couple other areas that we need to factor in, specific to parent support, and we're the beneficiary of a community school administrator. So we have some ability to do some things differently that we'll talk to as the plan becomes formalized a little bit further. But really just to give you the sense of the 3 options, the necessary components, which I feel very good about, and then our next steps, which basically will be after today's notes are put into our document, we will reassemble our committee of administrators and directors this Thursday. We will look over the plan again. We will put a little bit more time and energy into community outreach, and there will be a survey that will go out to our families and community later in the week to really solicit some more concrete feedback, things that we need to consider about parents transporting their kids, students with pre-existing health conditions, staff with pre-existing health conditions, and what the most viable option would look like. You know, the board joined us on the tour of the elementary school this evening, and one of the things that we pointed out in that facility was a classroom that's a little bit better than 600 square feet would probably be limited to housing 8 to 10 students under the state's guidelines. And a school bus, a traditional large school bus under the state's guidelines would be limited to about 11 students at capacity if we follow their letter of the law. And certainly all of these plans and all of our efforts come with the health and safety of everybody in mind first and foremost. And that's something that we won't stray from or vary from. But the part that I really want to assure you of is that you should probably have a concrete handle on what we're looking at and thinking about, I would say, within the next few days. And that when we get the survey results back, which I would anticipate will come back relatively quickly because it's on everyone's mind, that by next Wednesday, we should be in very good shape to consider submitting our plan to the state portal and meet that deadline of July 31st. So at this point, I know that the schedule, the calendar, transportation, and food service are really front and center on everyone's mind. But I guess I would turn it over to you to ask questions because it truly was just a brief overview tonight. And I know Mrs. Reed joined us and she may be able to offer a little bit of perspective if she chooses to. to share what her experience being a member of today's committee was, and if there are any things that she feels like he should speak to a little bit more tonight.
I had sat in on the committee at Megan's request.
You've got to use your mic.
Oh, it's on. Is that better? Okay. And the plan is well thought out. There was obviously an enormous amount of work and effort put into this. It's very comprehensive. Every area is addressed. Most of the comments that anyone had, and these were all people that hadn't seen the plan, really were just fine-tuning more than anything else. So I think from my perspective, we seem to be in very good shape with the whole thing. It was pretty impressive, actually.
Thank you. I think the one piece that really kind of set us back a little bit was last week's announcement that interscholastic athletics has been postponed until at least September 21st. And when we think about engagement, we think about motivation for several of our students. We want school to be the central focus of our community. We want those extracurricular activities. We want our kids on campus as much as possible. We want them participating in our athletic programs. I think that was kind of like taking the wind out of some of our sails as a group of adults, because we know that since March 16th, this is something that they long for. So I will tell you, last Tuesday evening, watching baseball take place over on the ball fields across from district office was a great sign. When you start to see the community coming back out and what the new normalcy is, whether it's coaches wearing a mask or whether it's athletes wearing a mask, they're getting back to some of those healthy activities that we know we want to see and that we want to offer. But right now I can't say with reasonable assurance that I'm in a position to offer that platform to our community yet. But I think as time goes on and more information comes out, we'll continue to implement that. We've been participating in regional meetings twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays with all the area superintendents for the Wayne Finger Lakes BOCES. We've been in contact with the Department of Health. We've talked with Diane Devlin and shared questions and or concerns from our perspective. And what I can tell you, and looking at several documents, is that the Department of Health and the Department of Education have slight variations that cause educators to ask questions that really seem to be bogged down in minutia, but we need that certainty because, again, our most precious resource is our children, and we don't want to take any chances. But I feel very good about where we're at. I think that once we look at the feedback that we received today and the norming process that we've been using throughout this plan, that we're going to be very comfortable submitting our documents to the state and then again sharing it with you so that you have a sense of where we're at before we publish it on the website. Yes.
So will the survey go to just parents, and will it be in writing, or will it be online?
Well, I think that for our purposes right now, we're really looking to target two populations, families, because of the students, obviously. And then our second one would be working with some of our bargaining units and surveying them and making sure that we've accounted for everyone's needs. And the format that we're probably going to use, because it's going to give us the quickest turnaround, would be through an online survey. And we feel reasonably comfortable that that can be done this week. Yes?
Have districts received any guidance from the state or ideas regarding supervision for the children if we do go to a hybrid or fully virtual classroom?
I can't say with certainty that we have, but I will tell you that several community members have asked that. And so one of the things that we're probably going to do mid-August, maybe the third week in August, is try to get a community forum together and bring some key stakeholders with some of those answers together to try and offer, whether it's in person or through Zoom. I think we owe that to our community, whether we bring faith-based organizations in, whether we bring in key business leaders, we bring in Sheriff First, we bring in some people from Wayne County Mental Health that are really all working together to support 11 school districts in Wayne County, but have a conversation relative to just our population. That's something that, you know, Ms. Pelliai and Mrs. Barr and I have been talking about for the last couple of weeks, just narrowing down who our key stakeholders will be in terms of bringing that forum together. And then we'll pinpoint whether it's in this format or whether it's in person. The likely answer is it's going to be in this format. And I also feel like some of our local politicians have been very good at advocating for our district. Yep. Any other questions relative to that? So I think the next piece is Megan delivering the professional development plan, and I think you're going to start to see some common themes in her plan, the scope of the work, and how it coincides with, you know, any setting that our students come to school in.
Thank you. So the professional development plan is a plan that we have to complete annually. Each school district must complete a professional development plan. And then an assurance that it's been completed has to be signed by the superintendent and the board president, and then that's submitted to the state. There's a required components that it must include, and it must be created with a shared decision-making group made up of various stakeholders. As you can see, the foundation of the plan really starts with the mission and the core beliefs of each district, because that's what we really try to focus back on whenever we're creating anything in the district. Thinking about the different components, but had mentioned that stakeholders have to be a part of creating the plan. It's not something that administrators or that I could just do on my own. So we really had the leadership council team work on creating this plan, and that involves administrators, teachers, and a parent member to really make sure that we're taking a K-12 approach to it and really getting input from the people who would be receiving the professional development. Can I go on the next one? So another part of the professional development plan that's mandated is to be looking at the organization's professional goals. And so those are the goals that, as Mr. Poole was saying, that we can really do no matter what kind of setting we're in for our learning. So this year, we have really worked hard on updating our curriculum maps, and we're going to continue to do that, but we're also going to be making sure that they're vertically aligned in a continuous cycle. So making sure that we never stop looking at them, and making sure that when a kindergarten map is done, that then we're looking at the first grade map and making sure they're really building on each other so there aren't any gaps in learning or too many repetitions if it's something that's already been focused on. Teachers will receive professional development in order for them to best meet their students' academic needs, no matter the format of instruction, whether in person, hybrid, or virtual. And this is something that we really started before the school year even ended. We were building professional development into the teachers' days online, where they were unpacking the standards. And this summer, we have a huge list of offerings that teachers can participate in, and we're getting a very large amount of participation. The nice thing about this is that we're modeling it after the way that teachers did some of the learning for students. So there's synchronous professional development this summer, where you log in and you take a class from somebody online, or you go through some different work online with other people. But then there's also asynchronous, which we found to be helpful for many of our students, where the teachers can get online and watch videos and do a reflection form about what they've learned and how they're going to implement it in their class. And that allows them to do it at any time that works in their schedule. So we really wanted them to be able to experience learning in the way that we want them to design learning for their students. Social emotional learning will be a component in all formats of learning. So one big focus has been that the first couple of weeks should really have a huge social emotional learning component built in, Because if we have students in front of us, which we hope to, then that's the time to build their relationships with their teachers. We found that students who had relationships with their teachers were much more likely to follow up and participate online. We also know that students that may have never experienced trauma may have during this time. So we really have to look at each student as a clean slate and really determine what they need in order for us to support them in social and emotional ways. And it's going to be really weaved throughout the instruction as well as the academic. And then last, teachers will improve their understanding of implicit bias and cultural responsive instruction, incorporating them into their practices. So this is another huge focus in the region, and it definitely reflects on things that are happening in the world today that people are trying to learn more about. And so what we actually have this summer is another asynchronous PD where teachers are able to go on and watch videos about implicit bias. And then one of our teachers took it to the next step, and she took the teachings from those videos and created a rubric so teachers can really compare what they're doing in their classrooms and how they're setting up instruction to that rubric to see how culturally responsive they are. So those are our goals, and I think it really does encompass all the different areas that we're focusing on this year for professional development. And then these are just some of the different places that we use in order to be able to provide it to teachers. So Wayne Greater Lakes BOCES gives us a lot of professional development, but so does Monroe One. Arbor is for our bilingual students. They've got a lot of opinions for our English language learners and how we can help them. RSC Task focuses on special education. Then we also have our instructional coaches in district, our administrators, teacher leaders. Those are teachers who have tried things and had success, and they're willing to teach other teachers, which is very exciting. And then we do use outside agencies. Teachers can put in a request for professional development, and if it aligns to the strategic plan and the goals, and they can get approved to attend those as well. Do you have any questions about that overview? I know you've got the more in-depth plan sent to you before.
I don't have any questions, but I'd like to thank you for the time that you and our staff members put into putting it together, because this master plan is so in-depth that it really allows us as a board to feel like we know what's going on, and I appreciate it.
Okay. Well, I'll answer questions.
Megan, can you go back, Tina, I wanted you to go back to goals. But you might remember, of course you do, Megan, the last one was teacher and including bias.
Yeah.
How do you measure that?
Well, it's not really something that you can measure. It's more like something that each of us needs to become more aware of in ourselves. Because there can be a bias among many different things. So in the past, we've had a professional developer come and talk about implicit bias, but she really focused on students with disabilities and what people's biases were without even realizing what they were. But it really, Mr. Poole was talking today that it could be about race. It could just be, generalizations that you make in your mind because of the experiences that you've had in your past. So everybody has different biases. You might not even realize what they are, and so it's kind of bringing to their attention what they might be and how you can kind of equal things out in your classroom based on that.
Yeah, I understand that. My question was, again, teachers will improve their understanding.
So I think that measure in particular, you heard her reference the rubric that a teacher created to understand how responsive they're becoming. The other part in terms of that measure is really changing their practice. So for example, coming in and understanding that, if a student's parent doesn't return a phone call, there's probably a very good reason why. And don't jump to the conclusion that because they didn't return the phone call, that they're just not interested. There are a number of reasons why those phone calls aren't returned. It could be, don't assume that every student comes to school having the same experiences that we have as adults driving in the morning. don't assume that because somebody's disengaged, that it's because of the content or they didn't do their work. And those are the types of things where it's not just going to be measured, it's going to be put into practice. So through ongoing efforts with our professional development plan, with our school improvement plan, and with certain offerings. What we hope that you're going to start to see throughout the course of the year is a key term about responsiveness. And you're going to see relationships, responsiveness, and relevance throughout everything that we do, because we feel with those three critical components that that's really going to ensure students' individual needs are met, because those three things are all very unique to the individual learner. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily measured through paper and pen, but it's definitely measured through practice and how we interact with one another. And the one piece that I would say that really is going to be a focal point for each of the buildings is that social emotional piece, and becoming better, recognizing and utilizing trauma-informed practices to really reduce the number of instances where implicit bias factors into how we judge things.
And even though you don't have a numerical goal or something you check off, perhaps just getting feedback from individual teachers saying, hey, how did you improve this?
Correct.
Did you improve or something?
Perceptive data is also a very critical component of what we do when it comes down to building a healthy climate and a healthy culture. And I would say that that is data that we'll look for. No different than when we say to somebody in the morning, how you doing today? You know, we're collecting data, we're gathering feedback, and that's exactly right.
Good, thank you.
Yep. Is that it?
If we do a hybrid or an e-instruction,
yeah,
how does that affect the therapies and things that some of our special ed children need, or speech or OT or physical therapy? How is that going to be delivered? It's kind of hard to do physical therapy and OT over the computer.
Right. And that the hands-on components of occupational and physical therapy is something that I can't tell you I have a clear answer on in terms of a virtual setting. But I will tell you, teletherapy is also something that I think is starting to become more and more a practice through medicine. So whether it's counseling, whether it's having those virtual check-ins that way, but I can't begin to tell you what OT and PT would look like without introducing a person in there. And they may model some of those activities and they may engage that way, but in terms of measuring performance standards, I don't even want to waste your time by throwing an answer at you, because they just don't have that component figured out. But I think the modeling component would certainly be something that can be done and demonstrated, but it's going to require, you know, some parent involvement and some support through that hands-on instruction regardless.
And I'm sure it will, but I'm speaking as a parent here because I've been there, done that, I'm a teacher. Part of your physical therapy or OT therapy involves a hands-on of teaching children the motor skills that they need. And I, as a parent, do not have those, and I'm sure I'm not the only parent that will say I do not know how to build my child's motor skills, how to build muscle development, things like this. And or Linda with speech, some things are, you have to know how to maybe hold your mouth to show a child.
Sure.
The parents just don't have.
Well, and I think that that's the part that we recognize, that it's an imperfect system. But going back to what we had said earlier about some parental components, the one thing that the state really didn't require, but we've kind of tabbed as our own internal document. We know that there is going to be some work that we have to do for parents in a variety of areas, whether it's the online learning, whether it's the translation, whether it's a situation like that, or it's occupational physical therapy, whether it's speech therapy. There are a number of different things, and many that we haven't even identified yet, because we just haven't had a chance to process all the different pieces of information. But that's where the survey is going to come into play, and that's where Kelly Marciano is going to come into play, because she's going to have a pretty good handle on the number of services and the level of services that each student requires. And Kelly's been a part of the plan. In terms of making sure that it's smooth with no issues, I can't say to you that it's going to be smooth. I think that it's going to be a process that we're all going to live through and we're all going to learn through. But I can tell you one thing, we're committed to making learning opportunities out of any of those shortcomings.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. That's good to know what's happening and where we're headed. At this time, I need a motion to approve the consent agenda. Linda and Paul, any discussion, questions, comments? All right, in that case, all those who approve the consent agenda, that's unanimous and that is carried. We are on page 2, after number 5, the good news. Does anyone have anything they want to share? Good news that we're headed for September, we know that. That's good news.
I think the best news right now is the fact that we have a great team working on some plans and processes to make the fall as seamless as possible. And one way or another, the group is going to make sure that every student gets the proper education.
Absolutely. At this time, Fort County, thank you. Linda, did you have anything you wanted to add about that?
Yes, Fort County School Board Association had its annual meeting June 30th. And at that time we had video because the representative for state education wasn't able to meet. He really actually touched on some of the things that are being addressed in terms of social and emotional needs of students after COVID, equity opportunities for all students. And he really also addressed that there can be poverty issues in different districts as well. And that video that was presented to us is now available on Fort County, so that if you want to see that same video, you can do that online. And then they also did all the business that they do every year, review the budget and so on. But it was a very, in some ways it was an intimidating video because you realize the scope and the depth of what every district is facing at this particular time. But it was well attended as a Zoom meeting, so it was good to see. Yes, take one and here's those down, take one and here's those down. One of the jobs that I have to do is to plan for board committees, and the paper that's coming is something that Michael and I have talked about. This is a
Cora. Thank you, Jason. We know that we are going to need 3 committees for sure. The audit committee, which is required by law. Pardon me. The policy committee, which was recommended by last year's policy committee. And a negotiations committee that Michael has requested. He also suggested that we might consider assigning a board member as a liaison to each of the schools. I won't say buildings at this point. Middle school, high school, and elementary. And that would be the person who would kind of keep track of what's going on there. If they go to things in that building, not that you have to go to everything, but that if you go to things, that you would be the person who reports back to the board what some good things are that you saw going on in that building. Would also be someone that if Michael had a question or wanted to talk about a particular issue in the building, that he would contact that person. And we still have leftover from last year the ad hoc committee on the handbook, because that is not in place yet. And in talking, going to number 2, the policy committee, I already put John back as chairperson. He is certainly our person who really has probably the best understanding of all the policies of any of us. I added Paul to the committee because Paul is an outstanding proofer, and we need to get that kind of those kind of things fixed before they come to the board for a first read. So that's cleaned up. And I would stay on as president. So I'd like to keep the committee, and then the superintendent is on the committee. I'd like to keep those people on the committee. The other slots, I would be interested in knowing from any of you, that you have a particular interest. And I know some of you may have time frame issues that you couldn't serve on a particular committee. But so I'd appreciate it if you'd let me know, email or text me. And the same if you're interested in a liaison, to be a liaison, perhaps you have a particular interest in a particular building. Any discussion or questions concerning that? Jason?
I assume most of the negotiations committee meetings are during the day.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's going to kind of decide for me on that. But I'd be interested in.
And so, pardon?
I'd be interested in the elementary school liaison position, or see if that becomes available if no one else is interested.
Oh, all right. Well, let me know later, okay? Just think about it, because if I obviously, if I can't put one person on everything, because I'm going to divide you all up.
So our goal would be the next Friday, and we have a chance to hash this out.
Yeah.
So the feedback, if you could send it to Cinda, we'd love to hash this out and have it finalized at our retreat next week, Friday, just so that we all work moving forward into August, and we can start really formalizing some of our committees with the understanding that the work that we're faced with, we can kind of say, here are our point people. And then to her point with the liaison, even designating a backup or a go-to should any of the liaisons not be available for any reason. Because I think that community engagement, community involvement piece is so vital to what we do. But we certainly want to make sure we have as much representation on these committees as possible.
Okay, great. And I believe with the handbook, we thought at first that we would be working on that tonight. And then again, it seemed that there's some issues that will be hashed out at the retreat. And so that we'll get them hashed out and then we'll be ready to go with that handbook. Okay. And there being no other business on the agenda, we do need to go into executive session. And I do need a motion to go into executive session to discuss the employment history of a particular individual. Motion, Linda, Tina, discussion, all in favor? Thank you. And to the people who are watching, you'll be leaving us now. And when we come out of executive session, we will not be doing any further business. So we'll say goodnight to you and thank you for tuning us in.